This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh. Revi. Joining us from Chennai is Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthi. He's the IIT director, and till September, if I'm not mistaken, you were chairman of the TSDSI, the Telecom Standards Development Society of India. Professor Ramamurthi,
right.
Welcome again to StratNews. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Professor, I just wanted to get the latest. It was building up. Now, an order has been passed about the 5G trials, and there's no mention of either operators or companies that are from China. This was building up. But this is not just political sentiment of what's happened, the bloodshed on the border with Galwan. There have been serious security concerns, right?
Yes. So, if you look at the trajectory of telecom technology, starting from 2G, wireless technology particularly, starting from 2G to now 5G, as it's very obvious to everybody, we have gone from voice to primarily data. Of course, voice is still there, but it's all data. And all the devices, all the people are connected to the internet all the time. 5G is also going to have a huge number of machine-to-machine or machine-type communication, devices that are actually not held by people but by connected to various machines. Maybe traffic lights, maybe vehicles, maybe substations, all kinds of things, which will be on the network, and therefore security concerns have gone up. I don't know how many times, maybe orders of magnitude compared to what it was in the days of 2G and 3G. These problems were in the making even in 4G, but with the number of devices going to be connected and the number of devices which are part of critical infrastructure where they are going to be connected in 5G, the concerns have become very, very acute in all countries in the world. You would have noticed this. So countries have started worrying about how secure the networks are, whether they are vulnerable to hacking, whether they're vulnerable to intrusion, whether they're vulnerable to denial of service attacks, all these kinds of things. And the other thing that has happened, I want to point out, is the telecom technology is becoming increasingly softwareized as we go from generation to generation. What I may mean is, of course, there's a lot of software running even in a 4G network, but it's mostly all contained in boxes that are sold by the vendors, and you buy the box and you get the specifications, and of course there is some vulnerability in those boxes too, because there's a lot of software in them, and software keeps getting upgraded, and there's a possibility of intrusion from the outside world. There's a possibility of somebody taking control and so on. But in 5G, a lot of the software is going to be running on cloud, maybe on a private cloud, maybe on a dedicated cloud, but it's all going to be running on the cloud, and therefore the vulnerabilities are higher. And because
but does that also give us opportunity? Does that give us an advantage in a way, Professor?
Yeah, I will come to that. That's the indigenization part. So the security concerns have been acute, and as you know, the government has set up a security committee that is basically going to clear every vendor's product, every product, as whether it is from a trusted source or not. And this only products that are from trusted sources will be permitted to be deployed by operators in the telecom network. So this, what you are alluding to, is a recent order regarding the 5G trials, but actually the intent of the government with regard to security goes much deeper. It goes even to the issue of deployment in the network, which is of course much more important than what goes in trial. Coming to your question on the impact of softwareization on indigenization. So of course, when the moment something becomes a pure software play or significant software play on commodity hardware, on the cloud and so on, inherently India is in a stronger position. Software is relatively our strength compared to finished boxes that are black boxes that are sold globally. And also, the best security comes from when the product is also designed and developed from a trusted source, not just procured from a trusted source, but even designed and developed from a trusted source. So security levels, confidence levels in security will improve as we have more Indian-developed, Indian-owned software products, or even other hardware products, but definitely software products where our strength is higher in the telecom network.
Now, when the security concerns are also because of national intelligence law that the Chinese have, which makes both individuals and companies give whatever data they want, irrespective of what Huawei and ZTE are publicly saying. But tell us, in terms of the geostrategic position that both countries are at and China is versus a lot of the world, how badly will this decision hit Chinese companies and the Chinese state?
Well, the telecom, there are two big parts to the telecom equipment market. One is on the network side, what you see on the streets, the towers, and of course you don't see the stuff behind the towers, but there are huge network operation centers, and there's a lot of optical fiber transmission equipment in the ground. And then there is the what's in your hands, the phones, right? The phone is a consumer product. A lot of companies in the world are, try to get into it. People get in, people get knocked out. Brands get, become very successful very quickly. Brands also disappear and so on. But there are security implications on the handset side too. But let's stay out of that for a while, because I don't know, we don't have, we need a lot of time to discuss all the, aspects. On the network side, there are only a few, very few, handful of players in the world. There are the Chinese players you mentioned, but there is a Korean, there are big players from Korea and from Europe. While the American companies play a big role in what goes into many of this equipment, there's no big American supplier of telecom network equipment today. Nor are there anybody from England or France or Italy. All of them used to be there 15 years ago. They've all been acquired and coalesced into a few players. There are only 4 players or so, other than 3 or 4 players other than the Chinese. And so obviously India's 1/6 of the world market, or even higher probably. And obviously if the Indian market is precluded for some company, for whatever reasons, it's a big hit for those companies. So I would say for the Chinese companies, if they're indeed precluded, as it appears to be, I think it's going to be a big hit, because India, next to their own market, we are the next biggest market in the world. And I believe many countries have done the same. So I've not kept, I only read what's in the news. I'm not an analyst. I don't follow this very accurately, but I see that they are probably going to get hit very badly as far as supply of 4G, 5G network equipment is concerned, because they were supplying all over the world 4G equipment till just recently.
Canada, EU, apart from the US, of course, Southeast Asia countries are taking measures there, like you're mentioning. But is there any leverage that the Chinese companies themselves have that they can, if I can use the term, hold countries or companies hostage because of what they provide for 5G networks and telecommunication?
I wouldn't say that. See, their products are admittedly and widely accepted to be very competitive, both performance-wise, quality-wise, and cost-wise. They offer actually very, very attractive pricing, and they also offer very attractive financing. So to the countries of the world that are prone to be run on debt basis with financed on a finance basis, I think they offer a very attractive option. And I don't know, I'm not an I'm not a strategic expert. I don't know what happens when you take a lot of you take loans and you're not able to repay and so on. That's outside my remit. But I suppose some of that will begin to play. The countries that have excluded them in recent years, the Western countries, Australia and so on, they don't get financed. I mean, they may get financed purely as an opportunistic basis, but not because they critically need the financing. So I don't think those countries, the loss of business is probably real, in the sense that it was pure business. And but there are probably other countries in the world where the Chinese supply, government is involved, and the Chinese supply this equipment on a financed basis and so on. And there's also this big Belt and Road Initiative and so on. So those things, those aspects, and I read a lot about how countries become indebted and beholden and so on. But I don't understand those things very well. But I presume what is true for infrastructure financing is also true for telecom finance. Yeah.
Sure. When you're saying Chinese companies are competitively priced, that is because of the state subsidies that they get. And there's that invisible cost, which is what I guess is getting factored in when you take decisions like this, the security cost, which hasn't been factored in, which is precluding them, right?
Yes. Yes, I mean, see, the Chinese competitive pricing is people. I have read things about the inherent hidden subsidy and so on. I'm not a business analyst. I don't have detailed understanding, and I don't know how much hidden subsidies are there in other countries. But they are. I mean, there's no doubt that because of the huge business they've been able to generate, it's all it's sort of a virtuous cycle. They do make their products are indeed competitive, and they are priced. I wouldn't be surprised if they are priced very competitively simply because of the huge volumes they generate. So subsidies might be icing on the cake, but I don't think those are I don't think those are necessarily the only reasons why they are competitive.
In terms of the ITU, where India has been, because 5G, we are requiring it to be rolled out not just in urban areas, or semi-urban areas, rural areas. IIT Madras, you have been involved a lot. The other IITs have also been involved. Tell us a little bit more about the indigenization or the attempt at indigenization, and how successful has that been internationally?
Okay, so
or at least the acceptance of it.
Yeah. So again, I'll try to be as succinct as possible. There's a very complex question. So India has not been successful in indigenization of telecom equipment manufacturing. Recently, in recent years, the last 3 or 4 years, we have at least increased the value addition in smartphone manufacturing and phone manufacturing in India. It is still, it's an assembly based value addition. We are moving backwards in the value chain. More components are being made, and there's a clear policy of the government to encourage this. So that's going to happen. On the telecom network equipment side, we have some presence in the optical transmission equipment space. I think a lot of the Indian fiber optic network, what is put into the ground, and all some of the electronics that goes with it, there are fairly good choices from Indian companies. But actually, the total value of the electronics part of the telecom of the transmission network is not very high in a network. Of course, digging in the ground and putting in fiber has a fair amount of value, and that's all indigenous. The electronics, what goes on the tower and what goes into the network operations center and so on, we have not been anywhere in the picture. There are these 4-5 vendors I mentioned. They dominate the global supply chain, and there is an attempt, because as I told you, security, both the economic requirements of the country of this size cannot keep importing such large volumes and value of equipment in a very important area completely. So both the economic considerations as well as security considerations demand that we become a player. You cannot become. This is an area where there are the supply chains are highly intricate, and I don't think anybody should have a notion that you can be sort of self-reliant in the good olden way of understanding it. But you have to be part of it. You have to be a major part, significant part of those supply chains, and we have to get into that, and that's very important. Countries, I think, seized to the matter. It's going to be a tough business, because it's business. You have to get into it. You are getting into it late. So the country has made some attempts. On 5G, there is definitely there is some attempt now, even in 4G. If you see if you look at the tender that BSNL has put out for 4G equipment, there is a significant attempt to try to see if we can get indigenous system integrators to pull together the full network and supply it, rather than depend only on these 4 or 5 vendors. And in 5G, there is a huge government-funded testbed project which I am coordinating nationally, where we are building many of the blocks that go into the 5G network, and we are already working with industry to translate this into the field. So we are hopeful of that. It's a long haul. I'm not saying we are near the end, but we are hopeful of that. The last thing I want to mention is that these technologies run on standards. The reason they run on standards is very simple in one sentence. If I have to talk to you today, we have to agree on the language we're going to speak in, and we've got to agree on the rules of the game on this. Who's going to speak, how we're going to, who's going to, and how we're going to exchange the conversation between us, and so on. So you need protocols, and these protocols have to be standardized. Otherwise, anybody's phone will not talk to anybody's tower. And when you make these standards, if you get in IPR that you have developed, then you stand to gain enormously in terms of royalties. So there's a huge, there's a big competitive effort that happens every time a new standard emerges in the world. And also, a country as large as India, if we don't participate in that standardization, apart from not having any stake in this, we also end up not meeting some of our requirements, which are unique to India. One such requirement is our huge rural requirement. There's no other country in the world, probably some in Africa, but I think they're even worse off than us in terms of having a voice. There's no other country in the world where 900 million people are living, scattered in habitations of average size, a couple of thousand every 2 kilometers, whichever way you walk. And this is unique to India. And there is no, the 4G technology, 3G technology, and so on were not at all optimized to deliver broadband to such communities. Most of the countries in which similar communities live, they are more scattered, and they all have wired broadband connectivity. In India, nobody has wired broadband connectivity. So we actually, when 5G came along, India took the lead and got in a new requirement in ITU to meet the rural coverage requirements for wireless broadband for scenarios like ours. And in the process, because there's a lot of give and take in ITU, it got watered down. The mandatory requirement in ITU wasn't good enough for what India needs, but it was a first step. The 5G standard was hammered out globally in the process that I explained to you, involving companies from all over the world. Does meet the ITU's watered down requirements, but does not meet the enhanced requirements that India wanted. And what we did in TSDSI in India is that we actually enhanced the global 5G standard. We are a partner in the global 5G process also. We took it and enhanced it, and we added some important features in a way in which we can assure interoperability and that we don't get islanded with some kind of a isolated technology. It's a completely interoperable and technology. And we came up with this thing called 5GI, which ITU has also approved, which has improved rural coverage in a manner in which it does not increase the cost or complexity of the equipment. However, the equipment does have to be modified, mostly in software, and vendors have to supply it. So if you see the latest order for trials that DOT has released, they have encouraged operators and vendors to deploy 5GI, because the trial also requires them to deploy in rural and semi-rural areas, and they've encouraged the deployment of 5GI. So we hope that vendors will actually see this message very clearly from the government of India and take whatever necessary steps are required to deploy the 5GI technology in rural areas particularly, though it will also help in urban areas, and get the coverage that we need. Otherwise, we are going to continue to have problems of coverage in rural areas, even in 5G.
Sure. So realistically, Professor Ramamurthy, in terms of India and the global timeline, where do you see realistic 5G network being available to the common man in India? Okay. So, the 4G and 5G networks are fairly compatible. 4G is already widely deployed, and there are no technical hurdles to 5G being rolled out by the operators. BSNL will require to really roll out their 4G network first, which they are in the process of doing, and then they can do it. The others are already in place. And the spectrum auctions have to happen. 5G requires additional spectrum. I think those are also in the pipeline. I don't think there are any big hurdles. The spectrum that is required mostly has been identified, so going to be auctioned out. There are questions about the auction price and so on. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but potentially, if it's priced too high or something, we have seen that happen in the past. Operators have shied away from buying spectrum and so on. But I think 5G is very compelling, and the required equalization, of expectations will happen, and I think spectrum will get auctioned. Equipment also, the pricing of the 5G equipment initially will be from these vendors. I told you they're very limited vendors on the network side.
will also tend to be, there will be a tendency to try to have high pricing. Indian telecom operators are very, very price sensitive, so there's going to be jostling on that front also. But indigenous players can play a role in making this competitive. So some of that may determine the speed of rollout of the operators. There are also some questions globally, not just in India, but places where 5G has been rolled out, that 5G's coverage is not up to the mark. In fact, that's one reason why we actually wanted whatever we have done in India to have been adopted globally in 5G, instead of getting watered down. And we believe that it's going to happen in the next round of 5G, the upgraded standard that will come out 2 years from now. But currently, there are murmurs everywhere in the world that 5G coverage is simply not up to the mark. And so that may also, to some extent, determine where it gets rolled out in India. I think in our urban areas, the tower density is very high for capacity reasons. And so when they're upgraded to 5G, coverage might be quite okay. So we may see 5G urban coverage happen pretty fast. Spectrum, assuming spectrum is auctioned and assuming the pricing for the equipment is competitive. The rollout in suburban and rural areas may take longer if the coverage is not as good as operators expect.
Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy, I absolutely appreciate your expertise and your time. Thank you so much for appearing on StratNews.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, and as always, I enjoyed interacting with you. Thank you.
It's been our pleasure, Professor. And just a reminder to our viewers, if you want to get notified when we put videos like this one up, whether they're live or we premiere them, just click on that bell icon on our YouTube channel and you will get notified just before we put these videos up. You can also follow our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to get all the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi.